it's perfect. It's perfect timing because I got all my screaming out over the past 3 hours, so it'll be mad chill, crazy
Yeah, well,
chill.
I hope there isn't really a need for screaming. We've talked before, and we managed to avoid that at least, which was nice. I think we did good there.
It's just it's been a while, buddy. So yeah. So I don't know where I kind of sent you a little bit of just kind of what was on my mind and maybe what was coming out as frustration in that panel where maybe it wasn't appropriate. So where do you want to start?
Oh, I don't know. I guess I just want to know where that frustration was coming from because from my perspective, it got pretty wacky pretty quick, you know? It felt like it went well beyond the actual topics on the panel and went more towards like a straw man or like a set of frustrations that you had with me that I might pertain to views that I don't have. I don't really know where it came from.
Yeah, so let's dial that in a little bit. So you know, Vaush bad. Vaush gets clipped, right? You
Right.
know, but sometimes you engage in hyperbole, particularly when it comes to law enforcement, and in particular that Destiny debate was just a little rough for me personally. And the reason why is because
You mean with
the takes
The
that
Rittenhouse debate?
yeah, like the original one, like a year ago. So I understand that's unfair because that's a fucking year ago, right? But we kind of all engage in this digital space in which our memories and debates and conversations are kind of like digitized and held on for the eternal record. And it's kind of difficult because there is so much content. Like, dude, I'm putting out like three to five videos a week. It's hard to keep up with. Once you start producing, it's kind of hard to keep up with everybody's perspective. So basically what I would say is like I don't need to debate Rittenhouse in particular, but the way that you view rhetoric and politics and all that kind of stuff, it's come up a lot. It came up in the REM debate. It's come up kind of like multiple times since, and so that was really like the chief thing that I kind of wanted to get at was how do you view yourself? Because the frustration is like sometimes you can engage in hyperbole and everybody likes a little bit of like edgy memes or whatever, but that can be also counterproductive and engage in some like contribute to the toxic political and binary environment in which we find ourselves. So how do you view your role in what you're trying to achieve with your platform?
Yeah, well, I just want to move people over to my political positions, right? I want to contribute positively to discourse, which in my mind would mean moving people over to my political positions because those are the positions that I think are morally good. Um, but I don't think that my perspective on like hyperbole is particularly unique, you know? If you're doing the debate bro screamy yell react to stuff kind of stuff, invariably you're going to say things that are hyperbolic, and I think that's defensible. If it's being done, I guess, within a reasonable way. Very subjective that, but I think we can agree there are good and bad ways of being hyperbolic about political stuff. Um, and further from that, like eventually you're going to be wrong. It's been known to happen even to me, but when that turns out to be the case, all you can really do is own up to it and move on. And I think that on the whole, I have a pretty responsible grasp of my platform. At least I feel like a lot of people are very aware of me and make me aware of my mistakes because I have a very large hate following. But when I look at other people in this space, Twitch, YouTube, whatever, just online politics, I feel like I'm constantly astounded at how much they seem to get away with, like how bad things really are out there. So I feel like if there's some like comparison to be made, I feel like I'm decently responsible, but you can always strive to do better, right?
Well, yeah. So I guess that's my question: is who are you comparing yourself to? With that being said, like when you're saying that, like I'm not trying to start like drama or whatever. So if it's too much, like you don't have to answer. But like, is there a name that you have in particular, or incidents that you have in particular that you kind of think of that like come to mind where you're like, this motherfucker did the same shit that I did, and I caught like triple the shit that he did. Like
Basically
what do
every
you?
argument that I have with people who I disagree with. Very rarely, I think, do I have good faith disagreements with people. The gold
Okay.
standard for me would be like Sam Cedar. I think Sam Cedar
Yeah.
does a really good job. When I look at Sam Cedar's stuff, I think he hits that line on being sometimes a kind of like frivolous or hyperbolic without ever actually it always feels like pretty responsible to me. So that would be my gold standard, I guess. In terms of negative,
Of
I feel
who
like it's
does it
all down from there.
well, of who does it well.
Yeah.
Okay, got you. Okay, so so if you don't mind, like me kind of like highlighting my grievances, and maybe we could just like address
Yeah, yeah.
them
What claims
in
or
sequence.
positions? Because
So
it felt like on the panel, like it felt like you were arguing with someone who had in that panel screamed about how they hate all cops and want all cops to die or whatever. Or you were ascribing to me some positions that I don't really hold. Or you or
yeah,
you
okay.
or you kind of accused me of being duplicitous, right? Like you said, well, I hope your audience is okay with knowing that this is the take you have. But the take that I had is the take that I've had for a long time. It was in a video that I'd released yesterday. So it's
Okay,
not
so
something I'm
yeah,
hiding.
yeah. So let's do Rittenhouse first, because that's obviously on everybody's minds.
Yeah, I love that guy.
That's like the yeah. All right, I think that's hyperbole. So the fucking the point being with Rittenhouse in particular, if since then, like your kind of argument is this is a dipshit fucking teenager who went to the fucking protest, and basically wanted to be a fucking cowboy and thought he was fucking Billy Badass, bit off more than he could chew, and as a result of the situations was able to put himself in a self-defense scenario that will ultimately, like, he might catch lesser charges because he put himself in that scenario in the first place, but ultimately he'll probably be acquitted of murder. Does that seem like an accurate summary of your perspective?
Yeah, it seems pretty decent.
Okay.
Well, I don't.
So
So I mean, I feel like he'll probably get acquitted. I feel like you can make really reasonable arguments for both sides, depending on
Mhm.
the extent to which you believe that he's responsible for putting himself in the situation that he was in. But like right now, I'm at a position in terms of the self-defense thing where I could understand where either case comes from.
Okay, so the only thing that I've seen that potentially because there is like a subsection of like the self-defense statute or whatever that basically says that like if you knowingly put yourself into the self-defense situation, then your self-defense claim can be ignored basically.
Yeah, and that's a
And then
very
the
subjective, like very much up to. Like I think you could run either way on that one, and I don't know if I could say either one is objectively wrong. You know?
Well, and I think that okay, so to show that there's like evidence to potentially support that position, there's the video where he was at CVS and he's like, "Oh, I think some of those dudes are armed. I wish I had my AR-15 right now." So that could kind of show that he already had the mentality of getting into a confrontation with like armed people at a protest, and then as a result, the prosecution or the defense could, or excuse me, the prosecution specifically wanted to argue that he put himself in that position intentionally, and as a result, he should waive his right to self-defense. The judge like banned them from showing that video. I don't think it changes like too much of the context, and it ultimately would just come down to like how you viewed that. But then my frustration literally yelled at Destiny like 24 hours before our little kerfuffle. Basically is it seems like the prosecution is just throwing shit at the wall, and that's like super frustrating for me because like I think that our justice system is already pretty fucked. So that kind of like winner take all mentality where you're just like, oh well, I'll just like lie about how interpersonal human conflict it like works, or I won't lie, but I'll kind of imply a bunch of shit and just see what sticks. That fucking pisses me off. And so that's where I was kind of getting it from both ends, where I was probably mentally dealing with your original Destiny debate with the original take of like, hey, from a utilitarian calculus, I think he should have fucking surrendered. And that's a frustrating position
Yeah, I
because
don't.
it
I
feels.
haven't. I
Sorry, go
haven't.
ahead.
I haven't really moved off of that. From a moral position, I do think that in
Mhm,
a situation where you could be construed as an active shooter, which
mhm,
again, there's no way for a person in the vicinity to know the specific circumstances by which Rittenhouse shot someone. That it's your
mhm,
responsibility as the person who has, and we'll just assume that it's self-defense in the initial case with the first one killed. That it's your responsibility to affect yourself in a way which minimizes the likelihood of the people around you construing you as a threat. I guess there's kind of like mixed evidence on how he responded to that, because on one hand, he didn't stay by the body, or just sort of lower his gun or in some way make himself small while waiting for police to arrive. But on the other hand, he was heading to police. So I think it's one of those situations where the most charitable thing I could say is that he imperfectly tried to respond in a way that I think would be reasonable. And then past that point, you introduce so many other variables that it's impossible for me to make like a definitive moral claim based on that info alone. But I think the abstract, the surrender to the
Mm.
mob take that so many people have memed about, which I talked to lawyers, I talked to police officers privately afterwards, and I really feel
Mm.
like outside of the memification that's gone on, like on the internet, like pretty much everyone agrees. Like, yeah, if you engage in self-defense in public, everyone else is just going to see you with a gun and another person dead. So the best thing that you can do is de-escalate as hard as you can, because other people might want to stop you if you appear aggressive, and then you set into motion this infinite chain of self-defense, which leads to a lot of death. So I stand by that. I don't think I've moved over that much since that debate, except for maybe some of the legal details as more evidence has come out around Rittenhouse.
No, that's actually good, because I think that would be something that we could kind of build off of to see if there's anything worthy of getting, like, fussy about. So I guess from, like, my question within the context of a protest where people are flashing guns and, like, all that kind of shit, we can argue about whether or not Rittenhouse put him in the fucking in that position in the first place, by choosing to go there in the first place. But within that context, do you think, like, maybe not reasonable? Because we're talking about, like, an adrenaline-addled, highly emotional situation in which people are acting in unreasonable ways. I mean, they're literally killing the fuck out of each other, right? So, could you see how after killing someone, and if you were to divide this up in a binary between right wing and left wing, Kyle would have thought that it would have been the unconsciously, not even a conscious thought, but in an adrenaline-addled thought, would have thought that basically escaping, fleeing to law enforcement, would be safer than staying by the body of people who were on, quote unquote, the other side that he had just killed a member of.
Oh yeah, that's totally possible. I mean,
Okay.
especially given the fact, like, 17 adrenaline, like, fuck, I have no idea what I'd do under that situation. Any moral claims that I make are going to be from, like, the helicopter, like Bird's Eye. I think,
Mhm.
like, morally, the ultimate negative judgment that I have for Rittenhouse was showing up in the way that he did in the first place, as a militia member. Because I don't believe the whole, like, wanting to be a medic thing, I think, is kind of secondary to the gung-ho cowboy shit, which is not even a Republican tendency. I think we just generally think in those terms in America, with our relatively lax attitudes towards civic policing and guns. But after all the pieces had been set into place, like all the die had been cast, I feel like it was more or less a toss-up on Rittenhouse staying there or, like, heading over. I do feel like if he had stayed there with the first body, no more people would have died, probably. That's a guess, of course. I can't know that, but I feel that's the case.
Okay, then, but we can, even if that was the case, like, let's say that we had, like, perfect hindsight, he just stays with the body. Everybody's like, oh, hey, he shot this dude, but that dude was chasing him, and it doesn't seem like he's trying to aggress on anybody else, and he's actually trying to help out. As a result, we're going to give him a pass. I'm not saying that's a reason, like, in an adrenaline-addled brain, particularly with, like, a very fraught and tense situation. I'm not saying that I would expect Kyle to do that, but let's just assume that for a second. Then we were already saying, like, yeah, self-defense might be warranted, and really the mistakes were made before the die were cast. I think the primary frustration for a lot of people is that this, kind of like you said, this is a helicopter view of the violence, where kind of like in a perfect, like, just running, like, raw math. We're saying, like, hey, here's how many people died. If we had taken this action, maybe less people would have died. As a result, he should have taken this action. But especially with, like, conservatives who are more about, like, gung-ho shit anyways, the mindset is, number one, that would be unreasonable to expect an individual to do. And then number two, like, do you think that, like, let's say that we inverted this situation, because I think that was, like, the main frustration with this perspective, was if we inverted the situation politically, or if we individualized it to you, where the die was already cast, but like, you had found yourself in the situation through some combination of, like, immaturity and, like, fucking political bravado or something, would you make that choice? And I think that was, like, one of the frustrations with that perspective.
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to say that, like, you can make an argument that something is or is not the right choice, and then also concede that most people wouldn't make the right choice, right? I mean, a lot of people, especially in situations like that, are going to sort of instinctually defer towards behavior that's more damaging or sometimes illegal. I mean, we can't always rely on, like, the what would you do in this situation stuff, but in that case, I mean, I could lie to you and say like I know what I do, but I would like to believe that from what I understand, I would keep enough of a cool head to say, stay by the body or like set down the gun or do something. Maybe not set down the gun or like sit or. I'm sure, given the context, there are innumerable things I could do that would make me feel as though I'm indicating I'm not a further threat to anyone in the area. I don't know what I would actually do, like, in the moment, though. What Kyle Rittenhouse did after the first killing may have been a fairly natural result of the dice already cast, you know?
Right.
But the argument that I got in with Destiny, leaving aside the grand crime, which was, of course, showing up there in the way that he did in the first place, was just more the abstract of how to handle self-defense situations. I think even in the pinned comment underneath that video, you can see that even like then, like the day where I had that argument with him, I said that like I could understand an argument for self-defense being made here, you know? So to me, it wasn't really about the legal claim. It's just about the limitations of self-defense as a method of guiding people's responsible behavior in difficult situations.
Yeah, so actually, if you don't mind backing up a little bit, just because I think this would be the primary thing, because I think where we would mostly disagree then is probably like the die being cast in the situation in the... Fuck, I pressed the wrong button. The die being cast in the first place. And that's kind of where, for me, you know, so in the result of like, okay, bad cop shooting, right? Or the perspective of a bad cop shooting. Maybe it was a good cop shooting, but, you know, there's still protests because of systemic conditions, this, that, the other. For me and for a lot of other people, just because like I don't know, America, there might be disparate outcomes, or there might be systemic racism, or this, that, the other. That doesn't mean that like the individual, the individual business owner, the individual employee, the individual members of communities have to tolerate further wrongs to themselves, especially if they're unrelated. So for instance, like if a business is getting burned down, and it doesn't do anything to address any kind of systemic racism or anything like that, then like we wouldn't expect the owner of the business to morally have to stand by because another moral wrong had occurred, and just out of like respect for the original moral wrong, they have to suffer. And that's kind of where, for me, that a lot of the arguments boil down to, well, Kyle should have been there in the first place. He lived, you know, 30 minutes away in a different state, and he worked in an adjacent suburb, but realistically, he had no fucking connection to that carport. That sets up like this really weird moral area for me. So it's like, so if you're saying the grocery store down my fucking street starts getting burned down for reasons that I think are bullshit, I can't do anything about that, even though I shop at that store and I know people who work there. That's like the moral framing where it's like, oh, well, you just fucking use insurance, 10 head. And that kind of pisses a lot of people off, including me.
Yeah, well, I mean, insurance, unless these private businesses have some exceptional insurance, I doubt they're going to cover the place being burned down by rioters, or arsonists or whatever. I think, I mean, this is one of those, this would be an example of, like, the limitations of self-defense with regards to the civic outcomes that it could, you know, achieve. Because, like, even though I do believe in the abstract that people have a right to defend their businesses. If you're a business owner and you want to chill on your property, like holding a rifle, waiting for people to find out if a motherfucker would, I think that's your legal right. I think that's your moral right. But civically, it's untenable unless it's done well. It's one of those things where it sounds great when you're talking about isolated moral behavior, but when you apply it to the real world, it quickly gets really fucked. Because what we're really talking about is like right-wing militias patrolling neighborhoods near protests. Like that's ultimately the broader like social force that's being fed into, right? Now, I'm not saying right-wing people don't have a right to patrol or whatever the fuck. I'm not isolating it to its individual components here. I'm only saying that this does tend to escalate violence. It does not tend to limit violence. It tends to escalate violence, especially when done in this way. Now, if you want to have like a group of 20 or so people who go to a neighborhood where you know there's going to be violence, and you've got med kits, and you've got water, you've got fire extinguishers, you've got everything, and you stay as a group, and maybe one or two of those people have guns, and you're like the wandering medic patrol, I think that's based as fuck, you know? Even if Kyle had gone there with his group, who were all, let's be fair, dressed as right-wing militias, like they were all rocking the look, you know? which clearly indicates antagonism, especially in an environment like that. If they had stayed together as a group, that would have been better too, significantly better, because people are far less likely to attack a group, and a group has a kind of cohesion that limits the likelihood of these individual outspurts of violence. That's why police stay in groups too. Even police, with all their armor, their shields, they stay behind the shield wall, because when they get separated and they get out in the group, they can be attacked and it can make everything worse. So in this case, this is like the whole being less than the sum of its parts. All the individual parts work, but when you add them together, you get something socially destructive. So I would like to, I guess, encourage on the right and the left, because these are our communities, whether or not we vote red or blue, to adopt better practices when it comes to stuff like this. Now, I feel comfortable saying that because the whole BLM time, I've been saying that while riots are the breath of the unheard, blah, 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 you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't flip trucks. You shouldn't set shit on fire, quit flipping over trash cans, quit breaking windows. This shit doesn't help. If you see it in your BLM protest group, you call it out, you shame them, you ostracize them, don't bring guns, etc., etc. I was comfortable saying that for people on the left, so I feel I have a right to then turn to the right and say, don't do that. Don't escalate violence. Show up with fire extinguishers and med kits, not with guns. Or if you have to with guns, show up in a large group to mitigate the likelihood of interpersonal violence. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and absolutely. And the interesting thing too is, like, we dealt with a new level of right wing fucking crazy on that panel. That was fucking amazing.
I love Hake. What a lad.
Oh my god. So Hake was having some interesting takes, and I was like, holy shit, this is like the stereotype of fucking like Christian nationalist fucking right wing fucking lunatics. I'm just gonna back off and chill the fuck out. And that's kind of my frustration, is because so far there's almost nothing that I've disagreed with so far, and then the only thing that I have seems to be just like a more bent on the individualist lens. And then I'm a fucking liberal, okay? I'm a liberal. I believe in universal rights and like all that kind of bullshit, so I'm just gonna fucking own that. And basically for me, the thing about it is, you brought up the Black Panthers as like a positive example of a militia that did deter violence and like all that kind of shit, which I'm sure is true. I'm also sure that certain segments of the Black Panthers probably did some nefarious shit. But the point is, like, my framing from like a liberal framework is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So if you're saying that like somebody can't engage in a certain amount of activity, then that has to be kind of universally applied. So when it comes to left-wing like paramilitary actions or whatever, like I'm not trying to compare Boogaloo Boys to fucking Black Bloc or whatever, but showing up in fucking Black Bloc and then beating the fuck out of normies and all that kind of shit, you can advocate for it. I don't really give a shit. I'm not gonna get too butthurt about it.
No, I have a couple of recent videos where I call that shit out too. I think I'm pretty consistent on this. I did a video recently saying that like that Black Bloc's tactics are incredibly ostracizing and alienating, and they essentially make an enemy of the entire United States, when in reality anti-fascism should be the ultra majority position, like 90% against 10%, if that, if maybe even more. So I agree. Right. I agree in the sense that we should be consistent in holding people to good standards for how they engage in protests.
Well, and not just that, but even so, for instance, like I think there's potential for left-wing militias to take to the fucking streets, even in an armed fashion as a protest. Against very specifically like fascist or white supremacist demonstrations, where they literally just show up, point their ARs at the ground. They don't say anything, and literally just the implication is like, hey, motherfuckers, we see you, and if you do some wild shit, we'll fuck you up. Now, I'm not saying that's going to de-escalate things. I could probably escalate things, but I do think that there's like a right to do that, just as a statement, not to invite violence, but to kind of make a statement that that's not off the table either. We're not fucking sheep. And so that's where for me, I kind of don't want to get into like the nature of the militias, but basically from my might as well, right? From my perspective, there's multiple subsets of these militias. Okay, there's the 3%ers who are like the constitutional conservatives who want to fucking basically be 19th century fucking ANCAPs. who want to like blow the founding fathers. That's one group. The other group are the Proud Boys, the Western chauvinists. They tend to be civic nationalists. They have some people in their fucking members, but obviously there's nefarious members of the Proud Boys. And on top of that, they seem to combine with Patriot Prayer in order to go to places that they know they can instigate a fight, and they instigate fights. So I'm not defending them. I think they're pieces of shit. I just think they're a little bit fucking less bad than ethno-nats. So if Richard Spencer and the fucking, I think they call them like Wignats or whatever, if the ethno-nats or the Groypers were doing the same thing as the Proud Boys, I would view that as politically more nefarious than the Proud Boys themselves, while the Proud Boys were still pieces of shit. Have I lost you anywhere? Do you agree, not agree?
No, you haven't lost me. I do disagree, though.
Okay.
I think that so the Proud Boys are a little bit ideologically heterogeneous. I think that so if you take a look at, for instance, like leaks from their group chats, or like what a ton of their members do when they're off time, like it's very obvious that a ton of them are white supremacists at the very least. You know, officially it was. I mean, they were founded by, like, I think Gavin McInnes is a white nationalist. He said some really weird shit. He might actually be a Nazi. I don't know. It's hard to tell with him, but now, the organization is officially non-racialized. It is they're committed to that. I mean, Enrique Tarrio. No, I said heterogeneous, chat, like not homogeneous, heterogeneous, not erogenous. You horny fucks, heterogeneous. Anyway,
Fucking chat, right?
Anyway, Enrique Tarrio is their current like head man. I think there are people in the org who have basically admitted that having like a brown guy at their front does deflect a lot of racism accusations. The thing that worries me about the Proud Boys is that historically, at least over the past 50 or so years, feigning non-racism has been the best way for racists to do the shit they want to do, you know? So the Groypers are too stupid, too young, and too virginal to conceal their power level. Meaning that any public demonstration of their, I'll put it to put it simply, Donald Trump couldn't really condemn the Proud Boys, but if he was put in a position where he had to, he could the Groypers, because the Groypers are so unambiguously what they are, and the Proud Boys put just enough effort into keeping the mask on, so to speak. So even though the politics of the Groypers are explicitly more dangerous, I think that I don't know if I'd call it subtlety, the attempt at subtlety from the Proud Boys, I think, makes them more politically dangerous as enemies. They could recruit more.
Yeah, because they're more politically viable. And then on top of that, one of the things that I would say is coming out on the right that's quite apparent to me is ethno-nationalism seems to be out, like at least like not as palatable as it was maybe a few years ago. But what does seem in and not going anywhere is a hybrid between like Christian conservatism and Christian nationalism. And that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Where like, so for instance, like Nick Fuentes or whatever, he says like race isn't everything, but it's not nothing. So he gets to be like a little bit racist, right? But then what's that? Yeah, just like, you know, good boy. So yeah, so he'll say that shit, but then like other people will actually be like, no, I'm not racist. You know, I'm friends with this dude and he's cool. And then it just so happens that they're like, you know, right wing, you know, hyper Christian conservative, social conservative, don't like trans folk, don't like, black folk. The kind of people who would say like, I'm not racist. There's a difference between black folk and N words. You know what I'm saying? Do you know the kind of person that I'm talking about?
Yeah, for sure. And those have always been more politically effective, right? I mean, since you, the open, overt, I mean, you like, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump are really far right, but they're not like running around saying the N-word or whatever. They have to hide behind this pretense of, you say Christian nationalism. I think that's great. You know, like Tucker Carlson embodies this perfectly. You know, it's always the Western society, right? He talks about demographic change being a tool for Democrats to destroy the country. He never really says white people or like non-white people. He just says demographics. He talks about Western society. I mean, we all know what he's saying, but getting like that language will get you a lot farther, and it's unions between those types that I worry about a lot more. The Groypers, I think you're right. The alt-right shit is mostly on the way out. Charlottesville was a failure. Richard Spencer is a failure. Nick Fuentes is deplatformed everything. All these people, they don't even exist anymore. They're ghosts. But this, we're civic nationalists. Wink. Vibe is definitely on the rise. So that's what I'm worried about the most right now, I think, in terms of like fascist organizing in the country.
Well, and that's my problem as somebody who like identifies as a civic nationalist. When I say civic nationalist, what I mean is I don't care what country you come from. I don't care what language your parents speak. I don't care, kind of like even your religion. I don't give a shit about. And as long as we can come together on some like core values that would like help us kind of form a civil society that is peaceful, then I am perfectly okay with calling you like my brother in this country or whatever.
Yeah, well, they're
Um,
lying, of
um,
course, when they say it. I mean, they
yeah.
they aren't actually. Most of these fucks don't even care about America. They simp for other countries all the time. They'll simp over Japan because they're ethnonat, at least more than America is. They'll talk about Brazil-based Bolsonaro. They'll talk about abandoning cucked gay homo globo homo America for China when China banned a bunch of gay shit because they're a fash country. They don't even give a fuck about America. It's very clearly about the demographics to them. Just the civic nationalist label is more defensible and is less of an optics fucking bushfire, you know?
Well, in my frustration in particular with the simping for China or whatever, is like literally watching Keith Woods be like Keith Woods, who's like a very young fascist philosopher on the internet, basically, who's a smart guy, unfortunately. But he will basically say like, oh, well, maybe we should pretend to be socialists. Because basically what we'll do is we'll implement like a socialist agenda, like a communist agenda or whatever. But then it seems like because humans are inherently tribal, we'll basically default to tribalism, and as a result, we'll achieve a national socialist state. And so they're actually saying like the quiet part out loud, where they're like, "Oh, let's do the Red-Brown alliance so we can seize power and then have a collective society, but then still be racist."
It's been a problem
And so that
historically. They do this shit pretty often. The
right.
the whole like or the really classic one is like, we could have this paradise you want were it not for immigration, you know. They pulled that shit all the way, like they pulled that shit 150 years ago. This whole like,
Oh, mhm.
unions, you could you want your wages higher if only it weren't for all this cheap labor. And of course, like the cheap labor isn't making itself cheap. They're being paid less deliberately by the people who are dividing the groups up. This Red Brown Alliance shit is growing larger and larger, and it's one of the reasons why I've always been screaming about the Nosbol Vortex shit. And we were just watching Hunter Avalone talk with Nico House, who's aligned with those types. These like people who use the affect of leftism to push people to the right, those types of people, I'm worried about them too. They don't really organize in public in the same way. Like, you're not going to see a bunch of red, brown, Nosbol Proud Boy types, I don't think, but they're pretty good at infiltrating the movement. They're a real problem.
Well, so what I would say is, for my thing is, like Caleb Boppin or whatever, I don't think that he sees himself as a tanky. I don't think he sees himself as fascist either. I think he sees himself as like a truer socialist than the fucking ANCOMs or LibSocs or whatever, because he's willing to not be apologetic about what he wants to do and blah, 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 blah,
The uncucked left, yeah.
Yeah. So he'll basically, make those arguments. He'll make those arguments or whatever, and basically, but I don't think he sees himself that way. Like, I don't think he goes home and rubs his fucking hands like maniacally in front of his fucking laptop, and he's like, "Ooh, I'm tricking all the lefties to be left wing." I think he legitimately thinks he's left wing, and same thing, like for instance with like Chaos's Mel, she's one of the most apologetic people that I've ever met for authoritarian communistic regimes. But you as I don't know what you go by these days, but as
The
an
only
anarcho-communist,
socialist, the
okay.
one remaining. We'll go by that.
Okay, the only real socialist, you're actually the cuck socialist because you're not willing to simp for fucking authoritarian regimes with a history of mass slaughter.
No,
So
I agree. I think they think they're being sincere, or I think a lot of them are being sincere. I wonder about people like Jimmy Dore and like Peter Coffin. Sometimes their behavior comes off as so ostentatiously grifty that it makes me think they might just be in it for whatever social or actual capital there is to gain. But no, I think that for the most part, we're really, really good at tricking ourselves into believing that we're invoking in the purest form whatever ideology we claim to be a part of, I mean, look at the divide between conservatives, right? Like, there are conservatives who say that, like, neocons are fake conservatives because they're not racist enough. And then there are neocons who say that racist conservatives aren't conservative because the dream of conservatism is the American dream, that all would be equal under the law. And there's no right answer. Like, both of these groups can make compelling historical arguments for how the other one is betraying the movement. But I do know both groups believe they're the real conservative, so...
Oh, did you know that I am simultaneously a fascist and a communist at the same time? Did you know that I was both a what is it, like, an authoritarian right winger hell bent on fucking rehabilitating Nazis, but I'm also a progressive SJW cuck who's basically normalizing social justice rhetoric in right-wing spaces because I'm not racist or intentionally transphobic.
It's a big
So,
world out there, you know? Lots of room. You
holy
see
shit.
the shit people say about me, man. Oh boy, I am an entire political compass spectrum. If you go by, if you go by
You were just called. I just came off of a panel. You were just called a stochastic terrorist and a what was the other one? Stochastic terrorist and a racist. Probably within about 30 seconds. So,
yeah, I have many such cases. Many people are saying this. I think I mean at the end of the day, like it's important to be aware of and oppose these sorts of things. I how do I put this exactly? I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with being alarmist about fascism in this country, but I think a degree of specificity is necessary, so we always know the exact nature of the groups that we're going up against. It does bother me a little bit, I think. Like, for instance, like Nico House will do this. Like, he called Biden a fascist, and like they'll say that like Republicans and Democrats are the same, and like Bernie is a sock dem, and sock dems are fascist because they're not socialist. And there's this insane blurring of terminology that's very frustrating to me. But I guess that's the internet.
Yeah, so can I, let me give you basically how this has been narrativized, maybe outside of your space. That way, like, you can kind of understand maybe why I came in like a little hot, all right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there was the original conversation with Rem where you were kind of saying like, hey, political efficacy is primarily what I'm concerned with, and I think that words are a function of, kind of like power in politics, and ultimately politics is about wielding power. So if I need to, whatever rhetoric is going to get what I view as my positive agenda implemented, that's what I'm going to do. And the way that came across was basically an adoption of like super aggressive realpolitik, where you're just going to say what needs to be said in order to get as many people over to you as possible, right? And even tonight, I don't think I've necessarily heard like a rebuttal to that, but maybe like a less extreme, statement, right? Or extreme version of that hyperbole. And then the context of that conversation was that Rem was like needling you about your fucking rhetoric and also gatekeeping fucking Twitch politics for the 50th fucking time. And after 90 minutes, you just started kind of owning some pretty hyperbolic perspectives, because probably out of what I saw is frustration. And so I saw the original 20-minute clip and I was like, this is fucking brutal. I have to respond to this. I made a response, and then somebody was like, hey, you got to check out the full 2 hours. I checked it out. It wasn't as bad. Because I could understand the frustration where you were like, I've told you the same shit 7 different ways in ways that are agreeable, and you're just being a fucking dick, so I'm going to start owning hyperbole to piss you off. At least that's what I see from the outside.
I'll admit that I don't think very much of Rem. I don't want to implicate myself here, because that discussion was over a year ago.
Right.
God, nearing on 2 years. And I don't have the best memory on the best of days. I don't remember the exact language that I used, but... So I'm not going to say what I said there. I'm just going to say what I believe and hope that it aligns with what I said in that conversation. But what I believe is something that I've been consistent about throughout my streaming, which is that I don't like lying to suit a political agenda because it's politically inefficacious. It's efficacious for me. It benefits me if I can lie and get away with it. But I think it's bad for the broader political movement because I don't gain that much satisfaction from grifting off of the optimism of my audience when misled. And to examples of that, I would point to how I handled Bernie Sanders. When Bernie Sanders lost, when he lost the primary, I was there the hour of, whipping people into shape, saying, hey, listen, Biden sucks, but you know what else sucks? Interminable fascism. Let's go. Riding with Biden. I was pushing people towards that as hard as I could. Every other lefty on the space took a fucking week to mourn and jerk off, or they or they like saddle with Bernie or bust for a while. I think like basically every lefty
Pretty
did this.
much up until the election.
Yeah. I was against it from nanosecond one. I even argued with my chat with it. So I think that if I had a tendency to lie. Oh, and by the way, the consequences of me railing against Bernie or Busters have been astronomical both for my career. Everything from the pedo accusations to the transphobia to the racism to me saying the hard R on stream combined are nothing compared to the sheer hate that I have gotten and the political connections that I have lost from not being Bernie or Bust and from going so hard against all the other content creators. It started the the beef that I have with Sean. It started the fucking Chapo Trap House beef. It started like TrueAnon Pod started shit talking me more after that. Like it was a huge rift. I mean, I even like shit talking like Kyle Kalinske, and I think I'm on good terms with him, even though he's done a bunch of shit that I disagree with. So if I had a tendency to lie for personal gain, I think I would have demonstrated it by not doing that.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie.
That's all I can only point to that because I can't like prove my intent to you, but I don't feel like my career is indicative of a person who's willing to flagrantly lie for self-gain. I don't like lying because it hurts the movement. Even if I can amass a ton of social credit points by saying stuff that's not true, I don't think it's good for us in the long term. It hurts us. It hurts our ability to introspect.
Yeah, and this is what was so frustrating. Basically about so let me just acknowledge this before I say it. Okay, if your perspective is that you rolled into the fucking the debate with Destiny while information was still fucking new, as a result you might not have had like the best fucking research or full context or some shit like that. You made some perspectives, you still agree with them, but maybe that I don't even know, because you kind of own the most contentious part of that, which was the utilitarian calculus. I think that was like the primary thing that a lot of people had beef with.
I don't think it's that unreasonable, right? Like you've been a police officer
from an individual. So my thing is,
but that was my take, just in an abstract sense. I think even in that debate with Destiny, I said I'm talking about this in the abstract. In this particular case, there are extenuating circumstances because it's a real life case, not a philosophical hypothetical. That could mitigate the reasonability of this claim. But I stand by the base claim, right? Self-defense is a right that we all have, but there are consequences to the public safety when a person exercises it, especially with a firearm. And which it's the responsibility of the person with the weapon to mitigate those concerns afterwards. And if there are people approaching that person in a threatening manner, depending on a lot of circumstances, I would lean towards them trying to de-escalate. Now, I mean, if you just exercised your legal right to self-defense and like you turn around and there's like a dude with a knife jumping you, then you can't do anything. You have to shoot. But if there's like a crowd of people kind of around you, like I think you could put your hands up. You can say like, that was a legal exercise of self-defense. I don't intend on shooting anyone else. And obviously these are helicopter perspectives because the adrenaline in the moment will make it much harder. But I think I acknowledge that then too. It's just something we have to be careful about.
Well, right. Okay. So, and so for me, as really the thing that I would look to, because you know me, I'm a fucking enlightened centrist, right? I'm always looking for compromise. As long as you're willing to say like, hey, from an individualist perspective, I can't kind of promise that that would even be my reaction in the scenario. I'm just looking at like a total assessment helicopter view of the situation, and this is what I kind of wish would have happened in the way that people acted. Then yeah, fuck it. The only problem, it's not even a problem, it's more like an addendum, which so far I don't think I've heard you disagree with, is the fact that like individuals after they fucking shoot somebody and they're running away because they're afraid that they're going to be attacked further, they might not make that fucking calculus of like, oh, that guy was attacking me and I had no other options. As a result, I'm going to try to like appear as defenseless as possible, and I'm going to try to like just make it this next 200 yards without hurting or killing anybody else. And that's my priority. And even if I get hit a few times, it is what it is, because that's my duty to humanity, is to try to minimize the amount of harm. I had to shoot that guy, but I don't have to shoot these people. I need to get the fuck out of here. I think that like that could be an ideal, but as long as we could acknowledge like human error and stupidity, not realizing that ideal, then I'm good with this take.
I completely agree with that. Like a lighter example would be if you're at like a party or something and somebody slaps you,
Hmm.
woman, man, larger, smaller, I don't really care. If somebody slaps you and then it's clear from their body language afterwards they have no intention of continuing to hurt you, like you got slapped, that's it. I don't really think it's morally right to slap them back because the only real justification for that is retribution, which I don't think is a really good moral argument. But I know that a lot of people would, and I probably would. So
Right.
it's one of those things where you have to acknowledge the dissonance sometimes between like the abstract ideal. It's just something we should lean towards. Maybe a person who's been slapped should think in their head, I probably shouldn't. And maybe a person who's just exercised self-defense by shooting a person, seeing a crowd forming around them, they should think, I should probably de-escalate. If that
Right.
weighs on their mind, that thought, that bias, I think that would be a good thing, even if they didn't act on it, because at least it means we're being compelled to good behavior.
Well, okay, so then this is coming to mind then. So for me, the dehumanization of each other around like political lines or whatever, whether it's like conservatives basically thinking that, transgender folk are gonna enter in like the Jewish space laser fucking conspiracy that's gonna turn all our kids gay. Like if it's that or if it's conservatives are fucking two breaths away from neo-Nazi. I understand when Trump was in power. I actually do understand the arguments around that, particularly with January 6th as context. But if part of like you were talking about like rolling the dice, if part of the dice roll was we've dehumanized the shit out of each other, and as a result we're more willing to see our co-citizens as like vile fucking enemies, and we need to be prepared to fucking shoot them. And what we need to do is try to like regain our humanity and empathy for each other's positions to the point that like even during a fraught political protest or riot, we're trying to do the minimum amount of harm and damage. That's absolutely something I could support and also push for culturally, because basically like my major frustration with a lot of the hyperbole that came out around like Kyle Rittenhouse and some of these cop shootings and all that kind of stuff is that like actually this brings me into a point that I wanted to speak with you about.
Mhm.
So if the point is to gin up political momentum in order to leverage that into action, I can almost understand it from like a utilitarian perspective where you're like, hey, this is a hot topic, it's a hot moment, I'm going to capitalize on this for content, I'm going to get people sympathetic to my side, and then we're going to leverage that into political momentum in order to implement my agenda for fucking reform or whatever. I think that's reasonable. My frustration over the past 2 years, blame the Democrats if you want, is that it seemed like we had that political momentum where like even conservatives and libertarians, well, libertarians were already on board, but even conservatives after seeing George Floyd were like, hey, maybe police reform should be on the table. And then it feels like that political momentum got fucking squandered. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most fucking bitter about when it comes about like what happened with the past fucking 2 years and all the hyperbole and all the shootings and the riots and all that kind of stuff, is that we haven't capitalized on it and turned it into anything fucking positive. And that like, I'm not trying to say that black pills me, but it does depress the fuck out of me sometimes if I think about it too much.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that there are a lot of things. I think there's a lot of stuff that you could attribute to that, you know? On one hand, I do think that some progressives, partially myself, chat might have to correct me on this. I think that for a while, I was moderately to tentatively in with the defund the police thing, but after a while, I saw its use being ineffective. I could be completely wrong on that, and I'm just misremembering that in hindsight to serve my own interest. I know that right now, in retrospect, it seems clear to me that the defund the police thing may have been an overreach. I think the Democrats distance themselves from it way too much. Oh yeah, I think I said good idea, bad slogan. I think I may have said a lot of stuff. My opinions evolved on that over time. You'll probably find me on any side of the aisle for that. For a while and currently, I think that I think that it's an overplaying of the hand, you know? I guess when the Black Lives Matter stuff really like started, I overestimated how much of its anger would translate into political efficacy. With the civil rights
Mhm.
protests, things were very, very directed, you know? Very, very directed with the civil rights protests. It's very easy to understand what they were going on about, what their intentions were, where they were headed, everything. With the BLM stuff, there was so much variance. And I'm not talking about the rioting or the arson either. That stuff happens anytime people get rowdy. I don't. I don't think that's exceptional with.
No, we didn't have a specific target to go after as far as reform, and then the one that was on the table didn't seem like it might have seemed more possible to other people, but for me it didn't seem
Right,
possible
and
at the
and
time.
I think like ultimately the real issue is that what we're talking about is really really nebulous. So let's talk about defunding the police, or let's say like removing their funding somewhat. Okay, that only works with decades of infrastructural investment paired with alternatives being introduced, tested, addressed, everything. You can't just defund the police. Now, do I think that as like a society we massively overinvest in our police departments? Absolutely, by a huge factor. If you look at other comparable countries, it's disgusting how much we spend. But there's a reason we spend that much. It's not just for funsies. We spend that much because we've got horrible neighborhoods with horrible rates of crime, because we don't have the infrastructure to properly support the jobs that police currently do pretty much all on their lonesome. We don't have the support network to defund the police, but it's a goal to work towards. But that's not easy to put into a slogan, and it's really tough to get the average voter behind. Civil rights is comparatively a lot easier. So, so what do you do?
Sorry, go ahead, buddy.
Right? No, I'm just so what do you do? Do you accept that the most you can ever fight for is milquetoast reform, unless it's a revolution, and then you get to go hog wild, and good luck with that, I guess? Or do you hope that a radical slogan like defund the police paired with enough anger can fuel the momentum, the energy to get real change done, even though the optics in the slogan aren't great and aren't immediately achievable? I don't know if there's an objective answer to that. It's just frustrating.
Oh, I have it because I'm the enlightened centrist, so I come with the solutions. Okay,
Yeah.
fucking Destiny in particular. You guys were having that social worker debate, and like it actually really got me frustrated because both of y'all had like correct points simultaneously, and it was frustrating to me that he was kind of acting like you didn't have a fucking point. So the main thing
I felt like he kept repeating things that I had already seen. He was like, "Well, some jobs are dangerous." Like,
of course.
yeah.
Yeah. But so the thing that you said that I think is not only palatable but actionable was the fact that police are jack of all trades, masters of none. And as a result, that puts people in dangerous situations. That puts them in basically like it puts cops in inappropriate situations where like a kid is fucking truant for school and a dude with fucking body armor and a pistol on his hip shows up to fucking yell at him to go to school. That's a fucking inappropriate use of state resources, right? So when you talk about defund the police and you talk about like breaking up the jobs of police, like a truancy administrator for school. That's going to cost money. It might cost almost as much money as a fucking law enforcement officer, but it enforces, like truancy law without, I don't know, terrifying children.
Yeah, and there's I'm sorry, I got excited there. I just, I agree.
No, good. I want you to be excited. Because my next one was field social workers. So a lot of the field social workers, I think, is an incredibly good idea. Some of the challenges that were a part of that conversation was basically like, you don't know what call is going to be good and what call is going to be bad. So I think you could probably send field social workers to certain calls that you knew there was like a low risk of like violence or whatever, and you could send them to those ones. But then even for the psych calls where there was like a high risk of violence, what you would do is you would basically have a two-man unit, but instead of having a two-man unit where it's two cops, you would have a two-man unit where it's a dude in fucking soft armor, a polo and khakis, no weapons. And then the cop would just be there to watch his back. And the cop could be as far or as close as the situation dictated. And also, I went to crisis intervention training as a law enforcement officer, which is kind of like a social worker de-escalation class run by social workers. That individual cop could basically take that class. That way he was also educated similarly. And then just by having that person on the shift as well, not only can they take primary on psych calls, but then also they will probably de-escalate their officers on the same shift. Because instead of having like gung-ho fucking dickhead fucking cops who want to escalate a paranoid schizophrenic into a fist fight so they can get an arrest for the night, you have the social worker and the other cop de-escalating the situation, and then the fucking dude who just wants to get his fight on or whatever, he knows that if he fucking unnecessarily escalates the situation, it's gonna be obvious to everyone that he's being a fucking piece of shit. And so that's where...
No, that's that's brilliant. I completely agree. It's also about the long-term investment, right? Even if you end up spending a little bit more on like this compartmentalization of programs. The thing that's really, really, really special is that over the long term, I think it would decrease the need for them at all. Like, so especially in like, okay, so I think it's pretty well known. I'm sure you'd agree with this because at least I've talked with cops to this. Like, a huge portion of the police budget goes towards policing a very small area in most cities. Like, I grew up in Beverly Hills, okay? The police in LA were not spending a significant or even proportionate amount of their budget patrolling the fine, fair streets of Beverly Hills. There are some areas that attract a hell of a lot more calls, a hell of a lot more attention, more officer deaths in the rare instances where that happens. It's not in Beverly Hills. It's elsewhere. It's in Skid Row. It's in downtown. It's in East LA. You know, sometimes it's in Hollywood at night because that place is scary. So with all that like being said, it seems like a lot of the problems in these neighborhoods get exacerbated by the inevitable agitation between police and criminal elements, you know? That's not to say like go soft on criminals or whatever, just more like if a drug addict is having a bad day, you know, and a encounter with a police officer means a night in a jail cell, then they get dumped out. I don't know how much of that person's life is going to change apart from an added antagonism to the police, but maybe it'd be possible to apply the theoretical priority for rehabilitation we have in our prisons, which we don't really actually do, but I mean, work with me here, and we try to apply it in a way that works on the streets as well, where these problems get magnified and exacerbated over and over when the most, with respect, brutish solution is brought in to crack down on criminal elements every time, you know? People are arrested, families are separated, drug addicts are put in prison rather than given like medical treatment. And all this means is that a generation later, you're going to have the same, if not worse, problems. Maybe the rehabilitative element means that in 30 or 40 years, parts of LA, just through better policing, or less policing, could be a little bit better. A little bit.
Yeah,
maybe 10% better. And that would make a huge difference.
Well, and this is actually what pisses me off about fiscal conservatives and social conservatives in particular. So fiscal conservatives, what pisses me off is they will save a dime in order to spend a dollar. So Florida, as draconian as it is with law enforcement, they literally started paying for the psych meds of homeless people, particularly paranoid schizophrenics, because it was so much cheaper to give them like $100 pill than in like a month's supply or like an injection. It was so much cheaper to do that than it was to keep taking them to the ER or to a jail cell. And so that's where fiscal conservatives need to get out of their own fucking way and do a utilitarian analysis of like where you're spending money. And there's actually a whole bunch of social programs that could be invested in, like, I don't know, universal pre-K, high quality education. Like one of the things that I keep bringing up, because I'm trying to like argue with right wingers about like quality education or whatever, is the fact that like universal pre-K or whatever, it would, the annual cost at the federal level would be 26 billion. We spent 48 billion a year in Afghanistan, and I didn't hear fiscal conservatives make a fucking peep. So that's where it's like, you know, do you really want to save money, or do you just not give a fuck about poor people or people whose lives suck?
Like WIC, like investing in WIC, you know, or contraception. There was a program, I forget if it was WIC or was something similar, but in every dollar spent towards that program saved the state $7 years in the future, because you know if people are getting proper,
healthy.
Yeah, if kids are healthy, if they're getting proper nutrition, that means they're much less likely to develop conditions or have medical issues, which will tax the ER, which means that like this all rolls down. It means they're more likely to make money in the future, which means they can pay taxes. Everything gets better when you invest in infrastructure for everyone, including the people paying the taxes, even the ultra wealthy. They may not get as much proportional to their income, but they have healthy, productive workers, which means more, you know, more goes to them, I guess, if they really want that so bad.
Right. And by the way, this is where you and I part ways. Okay. So my goal, as incremental as it is to make fiscal conservative and social conservative arguments about like why we should be investing in social welfare programs as much as that is quote unquote a left wing idea. So, for instance, like when it comes to social conservatives or whatever, they talk about like, oh, the strength of the family, this, that, the other. Well, guess what? If you want functional adults, you have to invest in functional kids. And in order for lefties to kind of convince righties that this is not just like throwing, money down the drain or whatever, what you kind of have to design the programs around is instead of like, I don't know, means testing that cuts people off in ways that fucks them over, basically saying like, no, this is an intergenerational project where we are going to view like an investment in this generation in order to get the next generation healthy, happy, self-sufficient, and all that kind of stuff. And if the next generation is also on government assistance through, I don't know, like circumstances that they can't control or circumstances they can control, then we're going to look at how we adjust these programs in order to continue to get the maximum amount of healthy, happy, productive human beings out of this process. And that's where it's like, I want to argue for these policies along conservative ends, but then obviously you and I'm mixed economy capitalist. I don't see myself being a market socialist anytime soon.
That's fine. Even agreeing on stuff like this is essential. A good investment in infrastructure, schooling, stuff like that, that's a universally, near objectively valuable thing. So being able to agree on that is I think really important. I don't mean to interrupt you or to cut you off. There were a couple of other things that I promised my chat before I ended stream, and I don't want to disappoint them. But would you there were a couple of things that you said earlier on in the discussion that I don't know if I got to. Do you mind if I respond, I guess, to what I think might be a perceived fault you may think of me?
Sure, please.
I know the broader narrative about me. I think you were saying like the ultimate realpolitik, like lying to achieve political ends. I do acknowledge that my language has been really hyperbolic on some issues in the past. I do get caught up in things sometimes. The police especially, I think, in large part because I think that the cult of personality, the cult of police support, I don't know. At least up until a few years ago, was pretty strong, and I think that I have a kind of inbuilt resentment, not against police officers individually, since I've known and been friends with them, but with the attitude that people take towards them socially. I also had a really fucking annoying person I went to college with, whose dad was a cop, and he would never shut the fuck up about it. So, none of that excuses hyperbole that trends towards misinformation. So. That is something that I've tried to work on. I've been trying to be a little bit more calm about that sort of stuff recently. I could name some instances of times that I did a little bit more research than I would have, but it would come off as kind of like, I don't know, pathetic, so I won't. But it is something that I'm trying to work on. In terms of like how I see myself or how I try to hold myself to a standard with regards to truth-telling, I genuinely do think of myself as a person who is a pretty reliable source of information when it comes to like political analysis, and a moderate like poppy source of information when it comes to news. I think that my analysis has always been much better than my news, because news coverage involves like getting the angle, getting the right groups to listen to. That stuff is a skill that I don't think I have as well trained. But I do want to say, like, if at any point you feel like I'm spreading misinformation or I'm wrong about something, I invite you to DM me about it, especially if it's about police stuff or whatever. Now, I might end up disagreeing on some stuff. I'm not guaranteeing a concession. I'm only saying that it's something I'm always open to hearing, because I think when that info is offered in good faith, it's always something that I can learn from.
Yeah, and that's that's kind of my offer, because we've always been friendly in DMs. Our first conversation was fucking awesome. I loved it. And then the frustration, part of the frustration is that might have come across in that conversation, is because I know you're not a fucking dumb guy. And like people in my fucking audience or whatever, they'll be like, oh, Vaush, he's just a fucking Machiavellian asshole and this, that, the fucking other. And they're like, oh, he got this wrong and he's an idiot and this, that, the other. And I'm like, listen, you can talk all the fucking shit you want about Vaush. He's not a dumb guy. And on top of that, he's rhetorically gifted. So don't, just because you don't like somebody.
I'm not dumb. I'm sinister.
yeah.
No,
exactly,
it's one or the other with some of these guys. No, I get it. I feel like I don't know. I'm always going to be biased with stuff like this, because I have a very, very large hate following, a very disproportionate hate following compared to my size. Like, I'm decently large, but that hate following.
Well, then I'll promise you this: if I got beef, I won't hold it for fucking a panel and let it come out in some weird inarticulate fucking gargle. It'll be more like, hey buddy, this is kind of bugging me. This is what I'm thinking. This, that, the other. And I do mean what I said, by the way. I don't assume that everybody reads my fucking Twitter. But what I said was like, dude, like I don't like socialism. I don't like communism. But you're a funny dude. Do you remember that time that your fucking keyboard shit out, and then you had a $20 keyboard, and then that keyboard shit out, and then
the cycle.
Dude, that was one of the fun. Like, I was like, you can fucking hate Vaush and think he's like a nefarious piece of shit or whatever, but that's just fucking good content that's funny as fuck. So like even if they hate you, they have to admit that you're funny. And so that's kind of where like
that's
I'm at,
step
where it's
one.
like
That's how you get them. I want to say, by the first of all, obviously I appreciate that, but second of all, this is actually something I've talked a little bit with my audience. Now I'm not going to sit here and defend objectively that I'm funny, but I do think that even if you dislike a person, you always have to kind of weigh that against their positive attributes, because if you can't do that, you might be like totally fucking blind. I think I've said this before with chat about even people like Nick Fuentes or whatever. Like he's got a funny cadence or whatever. If only he was like a comedian and not a fucking Nazi or whatever. Because if you can't see that, it might be like you're unable to see anything except negativity in the people that you disagree with. Sorry, it's a little late. I'm a little tired, but I appreciate it.
I'll let you go deal with chat. But basically, what I was saying is, I would absolutely play a game of Warhammer 40,000 with you. I would buy you a beer if I have fucking beef. Instead of waiting for a fucking panel to fucking yell at you weirdly about it, I'll fucking DM you it, and then maybe we can fucking hash it either in DMs, on stream, off stream, whatever. And I do appreciate it, by the way. Like, so I know that, like, basically I'm gonna go to chat and they're gonna be like, oh, he was just being sweet in order to appear. I don't give a fuck. If somebody takes the time to actually talk to me about this shit, and I feel like we articulated both of our positions pretty well, that's enough for me. So I'll keep it good faith, keep it in DMs. I won't do fucking weird shit on the side, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
And I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for falling for my nefarious Machiavellian bid at sympathy by being kind.
It's okay, because because you know what's going to happen? You're going to fucking keep doing it, and then eventually I'm going to get a Warhammer 40,000 game out of it, so I'm okay with it.
All right, well, I'll fucking practice. Don't think I won't. You take care, okay?
All right, I'll get you, buddy.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, great.
All right, lads. You can chalk that one under the conversations I thought would go a hell of a lot worse, but didn't. I just became a centrist? No, do not become a centrist. No.